All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by one of the forefathers of bass fishing, one of the most iconic anglers of my lifetime and of all time in general. It is Mr. Jimmy Houston. Jimmy, thanks so much for stopping by today.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you giving me a call, buddy.
So I normally don't start out with these cliche questions, I promise you, but right off the bat, I have.
Hey, I got some cliche answers, pal.
But I honestly don't know. I don't know how you got your start in fishing. I know that you guys moved to around 10 killer when you were like in high school, but did you start fishing before that, or was it when you guys moved to 10 killer? Is that really when you caught the bug?
Well, to be honest with you, Andrew, I can't remember when I started fishing. My dad was a bass fisherman, and he was a fisherman, period, just like what I am. I fished bass tournaments for 54 years, made a lot of money fishing bass tournaments, but I'm a fisherman, and my dad was the same way. He had a big, giant Umco tackle box with about 1,000 bass fishing lures in it, but he fished for catfish, he fished for crappie, he trot lined, he did a lot of things, and so I probably caught my first fish at maybe 2 or 3 years of age or something. I have no idea when I caught my first fish. I have no idea when I caught my first bass, as a matter of fact. And it's just that's all I've ever done. Now, when my dad bought a resort between my junior and senior year in high school, and so we moved to the lake, in the summertime between my junior and senior year in high school, and then I had intended to go on to law school after I got out of college. I stayed there and went to college all 4 years, and never did go to law school. So God saved me from being a lawyer. Saved all my friends from me being a lawyer too, by the way. Well, I can call them friends now. If I'd have been a lawyer, I probably wouldn't be able to call them friends. Or they wouldn't have called me friend. I might put it that way. But anyway, growing up on that lake and living on that lake made a really, really big difference in my life. There's no doubt about it. And but I fished forever. And I did everything you could do in college you could do around the lake. I did skin diving and made money at it, working on docks, cables and stuff underwater and finding things that people lost in the lake. I guided when I was in college. I guided water skiing and fishing both. I skied in fishing tournaments, and skied in ski tournaments before we even had fishing tournaments, really. And I trot lined. I sold catfish for a living. I've caught literally thousands and thousands of catfish, and I caught them rod and reel, trot line, just about every way you could catch them, limb lines, throat lines, and just about every way that was legal. And I noodled catfish and just whatever I could do to make money while I was in college. So really and truly, with the exception of the first 10 years or 11 years after I got out of college, I pretty much was fishing for a living, even when I was in high school and college.
And you have a very impressive resume after that. Once you went to the tournament side of things, I think we'll get to it in a little bit on like the media side, but just your pure tournament fishing history. So I actually looked some stuff up, and I have a little bit of like a trivia question and a teaser for you. So you fished, I think it was over 340 professional events from bass and FLW, and that's not counting all of the locals and everything. Yeah, it's a lot. Well, if that number blows your mind, get ready for this. So how many pounds of bass do you think you caught just in Bassmaster alone? I'm not counting FLW, just bass.
142.
5,431 pounds of bass.
Are you serious, Andrew? You're telling me things I never heard of. You mean they have statistics like that?
Oh, yeah. 5,431 pounds. That is, I looked up on the internet. That is the...
How many? What'd you say, 5,000 pounds?
5,431. Just from Bassmaster, not FLW.
Oh, my goodness. And I actually fished... I fished my first national tournament when I was a senior in college, which was in 1966. And I didn't fish my first BASS tournament until 2 years later. And I didn't fish all of the BASS tournaments. I only fished one or two a year, usually just one a year, from 68 all the way up through 1974. From 1975 was the first year I fished all 6 tournaments. And I just didn't, I wasn't able to fish them. I was working for a living, and I wasn't able to fish but one or two. But during that period of time, I fished quite a few project sports tournaments too. So I don't know how many of those there were. And we had a American Angler Association. I fished their tournaments and won their championship or their classic, and won the Project Sports Classic. And so I imagine there's another few hundred pounds or a few thousand pounds that could be added on to that, because we fished a lot of tournaments really before we got involved with BASS. We fished the second or third tournament BASS ever had in Eufaula, Alabama.
Yep.
But like I said, it was one or two a year I think in that year I fished two. I think I fished that one, and I might have fished Sam Rayburn. Rayburn might have been the next year. I think maybe Rayburn was in '69. But so yeah, we have fished a lot of tournaments. I had no idea how many. And you remember, my wife Chris fished all 21 years of Bass and Gal. Yep. And she fished every tournament and qualified for every classic. Was the only woman to do that. That fished every tournament Bass and Gal ever had. And in those 21 years, probably won about 25 boats and 7 Bass and Gal Angler of the Year titles. And I don't know how many tournaments. We never have ever figured up how many tournaments she won. I don't know how many tournaments I've won. I know I only won a couple in BASS. So.
The most feared bass fishing couple in terms of, if you're a black bass in the lower 48 states, you don't want to see the Houstons coming at you.
Well, you know, Andrew, if it had been team tournaments we'd have had throughout those years instead of individuals, I'd have won a lot more money and caught a lot more pounds because she's a better fisherman than I am.
You had a ringer, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about just that long of a body of work of catching that many fish, so obviously I looked it up for fun. Just the 5,000 pounds from bass is the weight of an adult rhinoceros. That is the weight of the tongue of a blue whale.
Oh my
gosh. It's a full-grown Pacific walrus, or it's a Jeep Cherokee. So when you're thinking of that many fish over, 4 or 5 decades or whatever it is there one fish that when you think of like your favorite catch on tour that just immediately comes to your mind?
Well, not really, but I tell you, I think that I have some special things that will not leave my mind. The biggest fish I ever caught is 13 pounds to 1 ounce, and I've only caught like 79 bass over 10 pounds, but that is still the largest. And that fish is caught on a topwater bait fishing with my wife. The line broke, we got the fish in the dip net, and still to this day, 13 pounds and 1 ounce, the biggest I've ever caught. I've caught, a half a dozen or so over 12 pounds, but have not quite been able to make that 13-pound mark. And I've fished some of the lakes here in Oklahoma and Texas this time of the year when they routinely catch bass over 13 pounds. Not routinely, but,
they're there, yeah.
Like at OHIV right now, there's 2 or 3 fish like that being caught every day. But there's 200 or 300 boats on the lake doing that. So you can fish there a lot and not catch one over 13 pounds. And obviously, one's all I've caught my whole life. So that's a very special fish. I think about another fish that my daughter caught when she was 12 or 13 years old in some of the early years of our television show. And that weighed over 7 pounds. We didn't weigh the fish; we just released it. But that's a really dramatic fish. But in the tournaments, I can't really think about a whole lot of individual fish. One of the tournaments that I did not win, but I got the money on, was up on the St. Lawrence River in upstate New York, and I did win a tournament on a BASS tournament on the St. Lawrence River. But one of the other tournaments we fished up there. I was running out into the big lake and running down to Watertown. And the last day of the tournament, I was up pretty good shape in that tournament. And the last day of the tournament, I had a cowling on my motor come loose, and it had hit something in that motor, and the motor started clanging and making noise. And I thought the engine was about to blow, and I was only about 10 miles away. And so I was around some islands, and I thought I would stop and fish around those islands. And I told my partner, I said, I'm in 7th or 8th place. All I got to do is just catch 5 smallmouth, and I'm going to be fine, get a good check. And I had probably 15 or 20 fish that day come up and follow my bait, but just wouldn't eat it. And I think I caught 2 is all. And so I told my partner with about 2 hours left of the tournament, I said, I'm going to fall completely out of the money. I'm not even going to get a check in this tournament. And that was back in the days when we had 300 people fishing a BASS tournament. It wasn't the small crowds like they have now fishing them. But and I said, they were paying like 40 places or 50, whatever. And I said, I'm not even going to make a check from the top 10. And just because I can't get to my fish. And I told him, I said, I'm going to put a spinnerbait on and go back to that river and just throw that spinnerbait as hard as I can. Just put my trolling motor on high, go down the bank, and I'll catch a 5 or 6 pound fish. And with these 2 smallmouth I got, that'll keep me in the money. I'll at least get a check. And so I did that. And with about 10 minutes left, about a 5 pounder, 5.5 pounder, which is a really big fish for up north, grabbed my spinnerbait, and I think I ended up still in the top 20. I did drop a little bit because I only had 3 fish that day, but that's a kind of a memorable fish. And it's amazing when you talk to people about memorable fish, and you probably have talked to others about it, how sometimes it's not the fish that wins a tournament, it's the fish that just gets you a check, and one that you set out to catch that one fish. That's what I told my partner. I said, I'll have a big fish grab this spinnerbait between now and quitting time. and that was the only bite I got in that 2 hours that I fished. But it was that fish that I planned to catch, and it's like the old TV show, The A-Team. I love it when a plan comes together. So, but I've had lots and lots of memorable fish that's made a difference in, in all honesty, making a difference in getting a check is probably just as important as making a difference in winning the tournament, because when you win a tournament, normally you win by a very small amount. And usually you realize that, well, maybe that last fish that allowed you to cull was the one that put you 5 ounces ahead of the next guy, or 3 ounces, or a pound, or whatever. But you realize that every single fish that you caught in that tournament was so important, or you wouldn't have won. So, it's those times when you're able to kind of pull something out of desperation that really means a lot to you, and particularly if it's not an accident, something that you had planned on happening and had it happen, which is really what fishing all about. There's a lot of luck involved in fishing. There's no doubt about that. But the skill overrides luck, and there's luck in every sport, whether it's baseball or football or basketball or golf or everything. There is luck involved. But the skill is what wins money. The skill is what wins tournaments, and it always has and always will.
Yeah, it's like what you said, right? When that plan comes together and you just get that little feeling like you know what you're doing, and you're like, okay, right? It's not all 100% random, and I had something figured out, and what I had in my mind that I said I was going to do, I actually went out and did. So yeah, it is funny how the least
you unlock certain things that make it happen and make it work. That's really that really is what makes the difference. I mean, it really is, and just unlocking the right thing, just unlocking the right pattern. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens in practice. Sometimes that happens, during the tournament.
Talking about some memorable fish, you've also had, at least for me, some very memorable baits from what would have been my childhood. When you think of like the old Excalibur baits that had your face and your name on it, I mean, vividly, I can remember in my tackle box as a kid, I think they called them it was like the Excalibur Cotton Cordell Super Spot, I think is what it was. It was like the little lipless crank that had the red eye and the rotating trebles on it. I had the Autograph Series Jimmy Houston Super Spook that had the little, metallic down the side, the white belly, the gold back. What else was there? There was I think it was called was it the Poppin' Image? Something like that. It was
we had a Poppin' Image. We did it. We were with Pradco for years and years and years. We got fired a few years back with Pradco, and we fish for Lucky Strike now. But Pradco's a great company. A lot of great people over. I still have great friends that work at Pradco, and it was a shame we got fired there, but we did. But yeah, and those super spots, we had two of them actually that were iconic, and one was a copper nose bluegill color, and the other one was a Rayburn red, which a Rayburn red was a red color with gold in it that was named after the late Sam Rayburn, which early in the year down there, when you're down there January, February, early March, that particular red color works really, really good. And now it's on a lot of different baits as well as a rattling type bait like that Super Spot. But those two baits there were sold in a package, and you got both colors. You got the copper nose bluegill and the Rayburn red. And those were two really iconic baits. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And the original bait, though, Andrew, that we first developed, and actually it's got an incredible story and a romantic story about it, I think, is the Red Man spinnerbait. And we built that Red Man spinnerbait when we were in college. We started building that when we was in college. And built them. And then when I graduated from college, I started an insurance agency, and we built them in the back room of our insurance agency. And I sold those spinnerbaits to Sam Walton. Now, I don't know, you're young. You might not, the name Sam Walton might not ring a bell, but Sam Walton is the man that started Walmart. And I sold Sam Walton Red Man spinnerbaits when he had 13 stores. 13 stores. Wow. And my deal and where we lived on Lake Tenkiller is about 18 miles from Tahlequah. And in Tahlequah, they put store number 10. It was one of the first stores that Sam built. The first one was over in Rogers, Arkansas, store number 1. And then he had a store in Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is 50 miles away. And what I told Sam in trying to sell him these Red Man spinnerbaits was that I'll tell you what, Sam, if you'll put these in your stores, I'll put the colors in there that work in every store. So that, like on Fort Smith store, they fish the river a lot. They fish the Arkansas River, and they had locks and dams on that river. And so they made lakes that were, as you went down that river. And I knew the right colors and the right colors to use on there. I knew the right colors to use on Beaver Lake and the lakes over around Rogers, Arkansas. I knew the right color on Ten Killer and the lakes, and not only the lakes, but the ponds around in those areas. And I said, I'll have the exact right colors in all of those stores if you'll let me do that. And we did. And ironically, over the years, we've continually had baits in Walmart, and now they have like 4,000 stores. And just this last year, we brought back that Redman spinnerbait, the Jimmy Houston Redman spinnerbait, and it's a retro spinnerbait. It's made by Lucky Strike now, but it's really just like the original. It's a safety pin wrapped in, so they won't break. It's got the short arm on it, which can increase a lot of vibration. Single spin only, no tandems. Single spin only. Living rubber skirts, and it's just an amazing bait. Comes in at one size, 3/8, and it's been a tremendous seller over the last 6 or 8 months since we've had it out on the market. And I've just whacked a fish on them. I mean, it is just as good a fish catching. And that bait actually, people think, well, that's an old time bait, but that bait actually won. Primarily, that was the bait that won 2 BASS Angler of the Year titles. So it's not that it was just a bait that some kid from Oklahoma was using and selling to Sam Walton in the Walmart stores. It's a bait that won lots and lots of money in national bass tournaments.
Well, and I'm a big fan of big, oversized top blades on a spinnerbait. Like around here in the Midwest, everybody loves to downsize, and everything gets smaller and smaller. But that big, oversized, just wampin willow blade that's on the back of those things, it's just, you're right, it's an absolute killer, and it's one of those baits that falls in and out of style.
Yeah, our Legend spinnerbait, which is a modern type spinnerbait with an R bend, but the Legend spinnerbaits have the silicone skirts on them, but now all of those baits come with one blade size bigger than what you would come on it. So if you get a 3/8 ounce bait, it's got the same blade to be on a half. You buy a 1/2 ounce bait, got the same blade to be on a 3/4. So it does have oversized blades, whether they're the round blades or the willow leaf blades. But the Redman has got that one blade.
The single,
4.5 is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So back in the day when they were approaching you and saying, hey, if it's Pradco or even now with Lucky Strike, what did they want from you? Because I've heard from different folks, especially, throughout the decades, that, sometimes they want help with design. Sometimes they want help, like you said, with colors. Sometimes they just come to you and say, hey, we want you to promote this bait. What did early days it look like to work with a bait company versus now? Has it changed at all?
I'm not sure it's really changed a whole lot. One of the things that's a little bit different now is that, pretty much everything under the sun has come around, and a lot of the things that people come up with now are simply things that they change a little name on, or they change a little something on and call it something new. We've done a lot with most, the bait company we started working with initially was Bill Norman. Bill Norman, a great friend. I spoke at Bill Norman's funeral. I carried him to the grave. Cotton Cordell, of course, Cotton Cordell became a Pradco company, Pradco and Cotton Cordell, Plastics Research and Cotton Cordell was both bought at the exact same time and became, really one company, although they kept those two separate brands. Cotton Cordell, another, great fisherman, great man, and spoke at his funeral as well. And but mostly back in those days, we were developing things that were not around. We were coming up with ideas and ways to do things. And as an example, something as simple as a rattle in a rattle bait, a lipless crankbait. Originally the Cordell Hotspot was the first one, and they did not have rattles in them. That rattle was developed by glue that wasn't holding one single rattle together. And Cotton was getting calls from people wanting the bait that rattled, and he couldn't understand it. And he went to a bait store over on the East Coast that sold a lot of baits to a promotion they had, and these guys would come in and they would pick the bait up and they'd shake it in the box, and they put it down and shake it. Oh, this is perfect. And what was happening was they didn't have nearly as good a glue as we have, and so that weight that they had in there, those baits really throw good, and they're weighted in the front. Lipless crankbaits. And a Cordell Hotspot was the original one, and some of those, that glue would come loose and that bait would rattle. And so that was how the rattle started in a bait. It wasn't anything that any of us done. And so what Cotton Cordell did once he figured that out, Cotton was just no country boy, but really, really, really intelligent, a great lure builder. He just took them all out of the package and whacked them on the side of the wooden counter to knock that weight loose. He knocked that weight loose, and once he did that, he put them back, and he had talked about this new rattling hotspot they had. And then, of course, from after that, a couple of years later, came out the rattle trap, and they thought, well, that was such a slick deal that we just put a whole bunch of little BBs in there and make it a bait that really rattled a lot. That's how the rattle started. It wasn't really anybody's great development invention. And I can remember back when the shaky head first came out, and everybody was talking about a shaky head, and I didn't know what a shaky head was. And I didn't want to ask anybody because I thought it sounded pretty stupid. And one day in a tournament, I drew a guy, and we didn't draw co-anglers back in those days. Those are actual tournament partners. We'd fish out of the front of the boat and stuff. And a guy said, "Oh, my go-to bait's a shaky head." And I said, "What kind of shaky head do you like to use best?" And because I don't know what a shaky head is. And he said, "Oh, I like this right here." And he picked his spinning rod up and showed me. He said, "That's my favorite." And I said, "That's a jig and worm." And he said, "No, Jimmy, that's a shaky head." I said, "What makes it a shaky head? It doesn't rattle or anything. Does it vibrate when you pull it through the water?" He said, "No, it just goes through the water. The tail's where the action is." And I said, "That's a jig and worm." No, that's a shaky head. And, and I'd been fishing with those since I was a teenager. And then later on, under that same concept, an outdoor writer came up with a Ned rig. Mm-hmm. And he just took a little bitty smaller shaky head or shaky worm with a little bitty smaller piece of worm on it. And when I first saw the Ned rig, I said, I got second in a BASS tournament, on Lake Ouachita. I don't remember the year. Jerry Ryan won that tournament. Hank Parker finished third. He informed me. I didn't remember who finished third, but I was telling that story one time. And Hank said, "Do you know who finished third?" And I said, "I don't have a clue, Hank." He said, "Well, I finished third." And I said, "I didn't remember that." He said, "Well, I remember who finished second and first." I said, "Who finished fourth?" And he said, "I don't have a clue." So, but Jerry Ryan won that tournament, and I finished second. But I was fishing with a little tiny, probably 1/16 or 1/32 ounce jig head with about 2-inch tail of a plastic worm on it, which was what we call a Ned rig. And I finished second in that BASS tournament on it. But again, that was before even a shaky head. So that just shows you we sort of regurgitate some of the things that's been around forever. So it's a little bit more, and even something like an Alabama rig, they were using those in saltwater way before, an Alabama rig was used in freshwater. So even that's not even a new rig. So it's a little bit more difficult. And like I said, right now, the hottest selling spinnerbait that Lucky Strike's got is a red man spinnerbait, which is one that I won an Angler of the Year title on way back in 1976 and won a lot of money in Project Sports tournaments. And I won a Project Sports championship. They're classic. They call it their championship. But year-end tournament, I won that on a red man spinnerbait. Well before I fished hardly any BASS tournaments. So, but it's a matter of, and we've done some fascinating things too. We took a bait called a Snatrix. Lauren Hill is the head of the zoology department down at the University of Oklahoma, the guy that developed the color selector, and I helped Lauren work with him. He worked on that 9 years, the color selector, and I worked with Lauren the last probably 2 or 3 years of that development, and working with the color selector. But we took a bait over there called a Snatrix, and it was a plastic bait that looked like a snake. And he told me that bass love to eat snakes. And that's really what they thought plastic worms were. And but in taking that bait over there, let me tell you the story of how that happened, because you talk about working with lure manufacturers. Lauren called me one time and he said, "Jimmy, I've developed the most amazing bait in the world. You use it, you're going to win tournament after tournament after tournament." And I said, "I got to see it." And he said, "Come to the laboratory." And so Chris and I went over there, and he had our tanks that we used for that color selector were 30 foot long. So we had big tanks that we used, and we actually trained bass to strike a certain color lure. That's how we determined what color they could see and not see, depending on the clarity of the water. And we trained one to strike red, one to strike purple, one to strike blue, and so on. And we train bass just like you train a man. You give them a treat if they're good. You don't give them nothing if they're bad, but we'd shock the fish if they didn't do what we want them to. We train so we could strike certain colors, but this was before before I knew that we could train bass. This is some of the earlier days, and he had a bass about 3 or 4 pounds in a tank, a relatively small tank 3 foot long or 4 foot long, something like that. And we would take this, and we'd take all these different kind of plastic worms, and we'd drag them back and forth in this tank, and the bass wouldn't even hardly look at them. Every now and then he'd run up there and look at one, but he wouldn't bite it. And we tried all different kinds of plastic worms that we had. And then he tied this plastic worm that he had hand poured mold that was shaped like a snake, and he called it a snatrix, Snatrix, which is a scientific word. And he put it on a piece of trot line cord, almost as big as your little finger, and he put it in that tank, and the fish grabbed it like it was, Adam eating an apple or something. And he grabbed that bait and he pulled it out. It didn't have a hook in it. He pulled it out of his mouth. The fish grabbed it again. He pulled it out. And I said, "Oh my God, you developed the best bait in the world." I said, "We can't tell anybody about this." He said, No, Jimmy." He said, "I'll let you. I'll make you some of them, but I want you to try to sell this to Bill Norman." And it was working for Bill Norman at that time. And I said, "Okay, I will." So I took it to Bill Norman. Bill Norman actually bought it, made a deal with him, and they put the Snatrix on the market. And then I learned that you could train bass. And so I asked Lauren, I said, that bass that would bite that Snatrix only, and the Snatrix was a really good bait. They sold a lot of them, caught a lot of fish on them, and bass do bite those snakes. And it was well designed, and it was not a gimmick or anything, but it was. And I asked him, I said, "Lauren, so we're teaching these bass to strike certain colors. We could just easily teach them to strike a certain lure, right?" He just grinned at me. I said, "What about bass that bit that Snatrix?" He said he would bite anything tied onto that heavy line. He would bite nothing tied onto monofilament. But you had this, which is a cord, like a trot line cord. It was like not even fishing line. And so that's what he had the bass trained. I didn't know you could train them at that time. But he ended up putting a good bait on the market, and it kind of tricked me a little bit. So beware of scientists. That's all I can say.
Well, and the Snatrix was like, I don't know, probably the easiest way to explain it is like a big ribbon tail worm now with it had a head but it had a head that like kind of stuck out a little bit. It was almost like a bulbous head. It had a head that looked like a snake. And it was a ribbon tail worm, which if you think about it, and snakes, they do a lot of big movements in the water, and that ribbon tail worm. And I caught a jillion fish on it. It's a wonderful bait. I mean, the bait was great. He tricked me into taking that one. And, Lauren Hill made a lot of money in the fishing industry. And Lauren was a pretty good fisherman, not a great fisherman. He made a literal fortune with the color selector. I helped him with that. He made a lot of the name Yum, YUM, that Pradco uses on their soft plastics. Lauren Hill came up with that name. And Lauren Hill was maybe one of the smartest men, maybe the smartest man I've ever known. He was a scientist, head of the zoology department at Oklahoma University, and a brilliant man. He used big words like fishermen talk about lures and stuff, and no one knew what he was talking about unless you were. So he had to be smart, yeah.
Him, probably. And he, he would call something by a scientific name rather than say it was a black crappie. And what are you talking about anyway? He came up with so much, and he called me one day and he said, "I've got the greatest name in the world." And Yum actually did not start as a line of plastic worms for Pradco. It started as a scent. And and Lauren Hill developed that scent at the University of Oklahoma. And he said, "I've got the greatest name for this scent." And he said, and I said, "What is it, Lauren?" He said, "Yum." I said, "What?" He said, "Yum." And I said, "Pardon me?" He said, "Yum, Jimmy, like yummy." I said, "Well, yummy is better than yum." And he said, "No, Yum." And I said, "That's the silliest name in the world." And of course, they've sold millions of
and it's still on the shelves.
So I guess that he was right about that. But a brilliant man. He's been dead a while. He got Alzheimer's, and and that's what ended up killing him. And it was sad to see a man that had that kind of brilliance in his latter years. I talked to him on the phone about once a week the last several months of his life, and he would say the same thing over and over and over. And he would always, Jimmy, you and I need to go. We need to take this and go over and talk to somebody about it. And I said, Lauren, I said, we don't need to be, you don't need to be trying to worry about building baits. And he said, I just want people to catch more fish and have more fun. And would, like people with dementia would tell me the same story over and over, and was always wanting to, but it was really sad. But what a great man, and what an influence he had on fishing, more of an influence than probably people realize. And, but so a lot of working with lure companies, a lot of developing things are sometimes you get into something in the middle of it and make it better. Sometimes it's a matter of paint schemes, just like the rattle baits that super spots that Cotton Cordell had. Cotton Cordell already had those baits, and then Pradco was selling those baits, and they put that 2-pack out and those special colors. And they asked me to develop a couple of colors. They asked me to develop a color that we could put my name on that I thought would be the best color ever. And I said, well, can I do 2 colors? Because I've always liked copper nose bluegill, because that's what bass eat a lot. And then that Rayburn red color worked a lot of places besides Sam Rayburn, but it was a great bait for East Texas lakes, which we always had national tournaments on Toledo Bend and Sam Rayburn every single year. And so we fished those lakes a lot. And I said, let me do 2 colors. And so we came up with Summer Sunfish, which is a copper nose bluegill, and the Rayburn red. So you do sometimes different patterns and different ways you do things. And many of the things that we do now, many of the things that come about by taking some of the things we have and making them better. Enough bass fishermen to know that if there's a little fault or some way we can improve something, we're going to do it. And the big deal that's the biggest thing happening in the industry in the last few years obviously has been forward-facing sonar. And forward-facing sonar was simply originally developed by bass fishermen and took their transducers and pointed them out in front of the boat as the side just straight down. And that was the original forward-facing sonars. And the guys that started doing that thought, wow, I can see fish out there 20, 30, 40, 50 foot in front of the boat simply by pointing this out there, which obviously makes sense that would happen. I mean, it's like the simplest thing in the world.
And obviously you've had a very illustrious career on the tournament side of the things, on the bait side of things, but over the past 45 years, I would say most people know you because of your television career. And I think most people have tuned in and watched Jimmy Houston Outdoors and Jimmy Houston Adventures. And I'm always really fascinated by the folks, especially early on, that were able to kind of transcend that connection between competitive fishing and your regular, weekend warrior angler that tuned in on the couch on Saturday mornings to watch you guys fish. And so 4 or 5 decades ago, whenever it was, when you decided to make the jump and start doing TV, what was the catalyst for that? What was the opportunity that came across and said, yep, I want to start doing television?
I had a couple of really close friends of mine that had started doing television, Roland Martin and Bill Dance. And Roland started his show 2 years before we did, and Bill started his 4 years. If I'm right on everything and figuring, I think I am. This is Bill Dance's 50th year in national television, and that's remarkable when you think about it. And Roland Martin's 48th year. This is our 46th. So that's a lot of television. That's 3 of the absolute longest standing fishing shows ever, or our television shows, not just fishing shows, obviously the longest fishing shows, but television shows ever in the history of television. I think only a couple, 2 or 3 soap opera shows have been on longer than that, maybe like General Hospital, All My Children, or something like that. I think that we're in the top, definitely in the top 10, maybe in the top 5 of longest running shows in the history of television. And obviously those soap opera shows have had a lot of different people on there, where these 3 shows have been hosted by the same individual they put 3 of us together almost 150 years. But so really, and that was kind of the catalyst, was I had a couple of really good friends that was doing this. And because of our success in tournaments, we had been invited to be on several fishing shows here in Oklahoma. Joe Krieger's show, Don Wallace, John Fox, the American angler, on a national level. And from guesting on those shows, I had really friends start talking to me and said, man, you ought to start a fishing show. You ought to do that. And so I started investigating it and looking into it. And to be honest with you, this is kind of crass to say, but I looked at it simply from a business standpoint. I was already fishing a lot. I was fishing tournaments. I was enjoying fishing. I didn't really get involved in the fishing shows in order to be able to fish more or be able to fish in a lot of different places. I looked at it simply from a money making standpoint. I looked at those fishing shows and thought, well, I can make money doing that. It was simply a crass way to look at it. Before about anything else in the fishing world or whatever, I'm a businessman, and I look at things from a business standpoint, and certainly at that age I did, and so. My buddies Roland Martin and Bill Dance both told me I would lose money the first few years. I think neither one of them made any money in their fishing show until the fourth or fifth year that they were involved in it. And when I talked to Roland, he had been 2 years and lost money both years. And so I actually set a budget, set a business plan together, and this was again 46 years ago, so it's a long time ago. And I set a budget down that if I lost $50,000 or less that first year, I would do it the second year. And I set out with knowing that I would lose money because everybody else that I'd ever talked to in the fishing show business and my closest friends had lost money. And so that's what I did. And I actually got my hands on a lot of Bill Dance's tapes, a lot of Roland's tapes. And I watched those videos over and over and over again for hours until I actually got sick at looking at Bill and Roland, even though they were good friends. They're very good friends today. I talked to Roland just the last 2 or 3 days. But anyway, I watched their shows. I was really looking at them from a knowledge or an educational standpoint. I was trying to look and see the things that I thought they were doing right, and I wanted to emulate those things they were doing right. And I was looking at the things that I thought they were making a mistake at, which is very few things that they have ever made a mistake at, either one of them. And I wanted to on those things, I wanted to to avoid those things that they were making a mistake at. And so that's exactly how I started. And I looked at those two individuals and studied their tapes, and I hired a production company in Tulsa to produce those first shows. But in 2008, when the big recession hit, 2008, 9, 10, and 11, we lost boatloads of money. We lost incredible amounts of money in the television show business. We had a large show and big marketplace and big expenses. And at that same time, we actually owned 6 boat dealerships. We was Ranger's largest dealers. And we owned Ranger and Tracker boat dealerships, 6 of them. And probably the worst 2 businesses to be in. About any business is a bad business to be in 2008, 9, and 10. But probably the worst ones was a fishing show business and television and boat dealerships. And we actually bled money. We lost pretty much every penny we had in the whole world during those 3 or 4 years. But we started making money again in 2012. And as you look back, 2012 is a long way in the rearview mirror now. And one of the things that I've learned about business, Andrew, and about money is that money really doesn't mean anything. We all want to make money. We work hard to make money. And those that have been really successful work extra hard to make money. 70, 80, 90, 100-hour weeks are the norm. And I'm 78 years old, and I still work a minimum 70 hours a week. And working hard is kind of the crux of it. But, I've been dead broke 3 or 4 times during my life since I got out of college, and gone from really having quite a bit to being absolutely dead 100% broke. And that was one of those times in 2012. And we thought that we would probably get back to only having 1 boat dealership and maybe, and I told my son who runs our boat dealership, he said, what are we going to do, Dad? He said, we're going to lose everything. And I said, we started this with just your mama and I and you and your sister. And it may get back to where that's all we've got left doing what we're doing. And he said, Dad, we can't run all this with just the 4 of us. And I said, well, once we get to that point, we won't have too much left to run. But we made it through that. And you learn how unimportant money really is. You learn that it's nice to have it. And like my granddaughter, my son's daughter, Jamie, and my granddaughter, Jordan, said, money can't buy happiness, but it sure can buy a lot of nice hunting and fishing stuff, which does give you a lot of happiness. but you learn that you can lose all the money you've got in the world, and as long as you're still healthy and you have your family, the money is the most. That's the least important thing you had that you could lose, because you got the things that's really valuable, much more valuable than money. You still got that, and they're printing money every day. They're running a printing press, more than 24 hours a day now. It seems like they're printing money every day. People are making money every day. So, and when you think about, when I graduated from college, we were dead broke. And so being dead broke 3 times during the last, however long it's been since I got out of college, a long time, but being dead broke and losing all the money we had in the world, we've done it 3 different times, not just that one time. We'd already done it a couple of times. So I knew that we lost it all. We just lost it all. We started all over. And so you learn that the important things in life really doesn't have anything to do with a dollar bill or $100 bill or a big bank account or whatever. And so this is still a great country. It still allows us to be successful if we're willing to work hard. And the great thing about what's going on now in this country, Andrew, is most of the people are not willing to work hard. Now, when I got out of college, most of the people were not willing to work hard. There's even fewer and fewer people that are willing to put in an honest day's work nowadays. So it makes it easier probably now for people to be successful than it was when I graduated from college. And those people that are willing to put in, I saw it on television last night. In this country right now, we just now got to 50% of the workforce going back to the office. I think it's at 51% right now.
3 years later.
And 51%. The other half of the people are not even going to the office. And I realize there's a lot of jobs where you don't have to go to the office. I realize that. But these are people that went to the office before the pandemic. So you realize that it's really probably easier to be successful now in the United States than it's ever been. Even though people are starting and trying to be successful, find it incredibly difficult. Can I tell you, it was incredibly difficult for me too. And fishing for a living is probably one of the most challenging things that anyone can try to attempt, no matter how they're trying to do it.
Yeah, and anybody who's ever had anything worth anything, you don't get it handed to you on a silver platter, right? Everybody that's got the cool stories of how, and they appreciate where they got, is because you do have to struggle.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I think, like you said, nowadays people are less willing to go through the struggle and they just want the end goal. It's like, well, that's not how you get there, right? It takes years and years of grinding it out and sleepless nights and no money and risks and all this kind of stuff to get to where you want to be. And like you said, I think sometimes we're so risk averse now, and everybody wants this just kind of like comfortable ride to their end goal. It's like, that's not how these people that are in successful positions have got there.
That's exactly right. And the good thing about success is most people are not willing to put most of your competition, whether you're trying to be a successful businessman running a laundry, or running a car dealership, or running a boat dealership, or being a preacher, or whatever, most of the people that are doing that for a living are not willing to put forth the effort to be the very best at it.
Yeah.
And so if that's what you're doing, that's what you want to do. Maybe you want to, run a hamburger joint, or maybe you want to, run a dry cleaning shop, or maybe you want to pour concrete for a living. I mean, I've got friends that are multimillionaires that started building patios for people. And now they own concrete companies and big landscape companies. And I got a friend of mine started mowing lawns in Cincinnati, and now you see his trucks running everywhere. I've got a friend of mine here in Oklahoma that started out working in his dad's plumbing shop. And when he took over the plumbing shop, found out his dad was $120,000 in debt. And that man now has got the biggest plumbing company in the state of Oklahoma. He's a United States senator. He's one of 100 senators that we have in America. Mark Wayne Mullins, a great man, great friend, a homeboy from back over around 10 Killer, fishes with me. And now they say, wow, you got one of the big, and of course now they do plumbing and electric and heating and air conditioning and everything. But he got that by hard work, and first thing he did after working for his dad was had to pay off all the debts his dad left him with. But it doesn't matter. You think about a plumber, that there's a lot of plumbers out there that are multimillionaires now that started, fixing somebody's sink or fixing somebody's clogged up toilet or whatever. So we still live in the greatest country in the world to be successful, but it takes work, it takes effort, and it takes more than skill and intelligence, although those help. hard work overrides whatever you lack in the way of skills or whatever you lack in the way of brain power. It helps to be smart. There's no doubt about it. It helps to be have skills. There's no doubt about that. But whatever you lack in all of that, you can make up with hard work.
So that brings us to the final topic here that I wanted to talk to you about, and that's obviously a big part of who you are and a big part of, I think, what makes Jimmy Houston, and why we love you for the past, 40, 50, 60 years, and it's your faith. And you are a devout Christian. It is evident in anything and everything that you do. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the things that we're seeing less and less in the world, where people are not as open and not as out there, I think, with their faith as I think they probably used to be, and as much as we wish they were. But I really, really enjoy that about you, and I think there's probably a couple lessons that we can all learn from you on that side of things. But a great example of that, and of your morals in general, I read this in an article, and I wanted to ask you if this is true or not. So this was probably maybe early 2000s. I read that Bassmaster signed Anheuser-Busch as a sponsor, and you wouldn't put the Anheuser-Busch logo on your shirt or on your boat, which was required of you guys at the time. And, I think it probably takes some guts to stand up to BASS and say, no, I'm not going to put this logo on it, when everybody else and all the other anglers are telling you, do it. You're going to ruin this for everybody, and the deal's going to fall through or whatever. Is that story true? And if so, was it a tough decision, not morally, but a tough decision financially and for maybe your future to take that stand and kind of stick up for what you thought was right?
Andrew, it was not a tough decision. There was no decision at all, to be made. From a financial standpoint, yes, it did cost money, but it was it was not a tough decision at all. As a matter of fact, the decision that I made was actually turned out being easier, because when I was out on the road working, doing a personal appearance, when we got the note or the letter that had all that information in there, and when Chris talked to me about it on the telephone, I thought you couldn't fish the tournaments in BASS anymore unless you had that. That's the way she interpreted it when she read down through it in the letter that they'd sent us. And she told me, and I said, well, just tell them that I'm not fishing anymore. I won't fish. And I didn't really think about it. I had a lot of the fishermen ask me, didn't you pray about that? And I said, well, absolutely not. I mean, I know that it's a bad thing to do. And so I know that it's wrong. And why do I have to ask God if, God, I know this is wrong, but tell me I can do it anyway.
Yeah,
or tell
I
me
know the answer.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense for me to pray about it. And I said, just tell them that, I won't be fishing BASS anymore. I just won't fish the tournaments, because I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put the patch on my shirt or put it on my boat. And I can tell you several stories how God validated that decision as time went on over the next few years, or validated it really pretty remarkably. But those are kind of long stories. But anyway, and I said, just tell them I'm not going to fish anymore. I'll quit fishing tournaments. And then she called me back about an hour later, and she said, as I've read through this thing, it looks like that you can still fish, but you can't. And I guess probably they really couldn't kick you out, because, I guess you could probably had some legal means or something. They couldn't kick you out.
Yeah.
But they said you can't get any points you can't fish any more Bassmaster Classics. You can't qualify for what they started calling their elite tournaments. That's where the word elite first came out. And those tournaments didn't have any entry fee, and you could win quite a bit of money. So we were excited about those, where you could go fish and didn't have any entry fee. You could still win a lot of money. And said you can't qualify for the elite tournaments. You can't qualify for the Angler of the Year, so you can't win that anymore. And I'd won a couple of those. And you can't qualify for the Classic. And I fished, I don't know, 15 or 18 of those, or 20. I don't know how to fish, but anyway, you can't do that. But you can still fish the tournaments. And I said, well, that's cool. I said, tell them I'll fish the tournaments, but I'm still not wearing a patch. And we started getting some calls from some of the anglers, and they were chastising me, saying that I was messing up the whole deal, that Anheuser-Busch is putting a lot of money in the sport, and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I turned it down, and it was good. But I'll tell you again, there was no decision to be made. There was no thinking, should I do that or should I not do it? I mean, I immediately said, well, in fact, that it was good that I could still fish the tournaments. I thought, of course, I didn't make any more Classics, obviously, and and didn't get to fish those elite tournaments that they had. And they still asked me to come back to BASS. They asked me again this last year to come back to BASS. So it didn't keep me from fishing BASS tournaments. It just kept me from some of I didn't have any points after that, so that stopped. But I had already made, honestly, Andrew, a decision about alcohol. I am not anti-alcohol. I'm not anti-drinking. I don't drink, but I, we have a big store and a boat dealership and a sporting goods store and Subway shop and gas station and stuff on Lake Tenkiller that we've had for a long, long time. And when we opened that store, I made a decision not to sell beer in that store, simply because of the fact that we had we're on a lake, we're in the mountains, and we had a lot of accidents. The majority of them were caused by drinking and driving, and a lot of people were killed in those accidents. And so when we opened that store, I said, well, I'm not going to sell alcohol. I don't want anybody to stop in and maybe buy their last 6-pack that might put them over the limit or over the edge and drive down the road 5 miles and run into somebody and kill them. And they say, well, yeah, he stopped up there at Jimmy's and bought a 6-pack 5 miles back behind and then drove down there and had this wreck. And he might have a wreck and kill. It might be somebody I know. It might be a friend of mine. He might, the person that were drunk might be a friend of mine. The person that was killed might be a member of my family. And I said, well, I'll not sell beer. And I'd made that decision, which cost a lot of money. The beer distributors at that time told me it was costing between $30,000 and $75,000 a year to not sell beer, just pure profit. Well, that's a lot of money. And I told them, well, it doesn't really matter how much it costs. I just don't believe that. And I did it mostly thinking about the young people. And the thing that I thought about mostly with BASS and was, again, we have influence on people because we have the ability to catch fish in a tournament. And that influence is in all different ways, shapes, and forms. And they are interested in what we say, but they're more, they react more to what we do. They watch us pitching and flipping and underhand casting. They watch us hook setting. They watch us tying knots. And if they watch us promoting beer and drinking beer, they think it's okay. And so, and I'm not trying to get on any soapbox, and I wasn't trying to get on any soapbox there. It was just a belief that I had. And so that belief had already been costing me between $30,000 and $75,000 a year. So, that wasn't the money. And it was just simply points and not being able to fish the Bassmaster Classic, which was a lot of fun. Not being able to try to win another Angler of the Year title, which was really neat. And not being able to fish tournaments, you didn't have to pay an entry fee.
Yeah, right.
Which is a big deal. But we have been blessed many, many times over, I'm sure, for that decision. God's validated that decision, that it was a good decision all along. And we call it a decision, but it really wasn't. It was simply an answer to a rule change. And I quit tournament fishing, Andrew, because of a rule change. And I 2019 was the last year I fished, and I was fishing FLW. FLW put the rule in that you could not fish the 3 days practice with a family member anymore. You couldn't fish with anybody. And they'd always had where you could fish with a family member. You could fish with your wife. You could fish with your brother, your father, your daughter, your son, and a lot of the guys did that. Yeah. A lot of the guys fished with their wives. And during the summer, a lot of them would take their kids practicing with them. And over the years, so many of the guys, Mark Davis, Alton Jones, so many of the guys took their kids with them. They homeschooled them. So they had their boys with them, ever since they were just hardly old enough to walk out in a boat with them those 3 days practice. Well, they changed that rule. And so Chris and I had fished together ever since we were in high school. So, and we had practiced together. She practiced with me in all the BASS tournaments and Project Sports and American Anglers and FLW. When she was there, and she was there at 90% of them, I practiced with her in the Bass and Gal tournaments when I was there. Sometimes we had tournaments that conflicted where she'd go to a Bass and Gal and I'd go to a BASS, and we wouldn't be practicing together. But they put that rule in there where you couldn't do that. And I waited clear up until about December 15th before the year was to start in 2020. And they finally said, well, that rule's going to stay, Jimmy. It's in. And I said, well, I'm not going to fish then. And I made the decision not to fish. And BASS called and gave me a spot back in BASS, but they had the same rule. And so I turned that spot down, and I think Jay Ellis took that spot, and I think now Jay's retired and Larry Nixon took that spot, which is great. I'm tickled to death to see Jay and Larry both back fishing BASS. And I wouldn't mind going back and fishing BASS another year or two. I fished tournaments for 54 years, and it'd be kind of nice to say 55 instead of 54, but probably if I did that, it'd be nice to say 56 instead of 55.
Yep. Slippery slope, yeah.
But, until Chris gets well, I'll not go back fishing tournaments. But once Chris fully recovers, you never know. You never know. So
So now you've parlayed that into, you've written 3 books. So on top of everything we've already talked about, now obviously you are a multi-time author too. So you've had Catch a Better Life, Hooked for Life, and then Catch of the Day, I believe. And I'm currently reading some of Catch a Better Life, which is a daily devotional. I think 2 of those 3 are daily devotionals now. And you do a really good job. You do a great job of kind of weaving in both scripture and making it easy to digest. And then it's just a one-page, basically like, we're going to tie this into something to do with bass fishing. And I think anybody that's listening to this that wants, something to have food for thought for that day and something to challenge them a little bit in the morning, they're great books. The one, a couple days ago, you did a take on, I think it was like Hebrews 11:6, where it's all about persistence of faith and not just showing up and not just having faith, but you have to work at it. And then you tied that into, showing up for 3 days before a tournament and the practice for a tournament. You don't just show up to a lake and know that there's fish in it and you expect on tournament day you're going to catch them. You have to put in the work and you have to, go out and you have to put in your time. And it's the same thing with your faith. And so I think you do a really, really good job of that. When did you decide that you wanted to go down that road and you wanted to write a couple books and kind of use that platform to weave in your 2 loves of obviously faith and fishing?
Well, I appreciate that. And we wrote that first daily devotional. And daily devotional books are extremely difficult to write. And I wrote that first one, Catch of the Day, back in 2005, and it was a very successful book. And we've written about 5 or 6 books. We written a couple, 2 or 3 other books that were not scriptural books, and we wrote a couple that were scriptural. Now we've written 2 daily devotionals. And I said when I wrote that one in 2005, I'd never write another one. But I was contacted by Nelson Publishing, the Jack Countryman division, after I'd written a couple scriptural books that they published that were gift books that were very successful, about writing a daily devotional. And I agreed to do it, not knowing how difficult it was. And it took 5 months to write that first book. It took about 2 years to write this second one. And I said I would never do it. But once we, and back, we didn't have social media. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have YouTube. After we actually started the Catch of the Day channel, after starting you reading some of that on our regular YouTube channel, we started reading the Catch of the Day devotionals, and people liked them, so we broke that off into a separate YouTube channel, and then we, from that, we decided to write the second one, which I should not have ever decided to do that. It's a tremendous amount of work to write a 365-day daily devotional. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a scholar. I've had no religious training at all other than being in church all my life. So we're definitely, it's written from a layman's point of view and just a regular everyday walk of life Christian, which is what I am. So I'm not a preacher, even though I do speak at 15 or 20 or 25 churches a year. I've got probably 15 on the schedule for right now for this year, and schedule another one today in Montana, but in October. But the daily devotional books have turned into something very, very special, because they actually are having an effect on people's life. And the publisher, was the one to come up with a Better Life idea, and I wanted to call it something else. And I finally settled on Catch a Better Life, because that book or that devotional blended with that scripture will make a person better. It'll make you a better husband, a better wife, a better father, a better mother. It will make you better, because if you honor God by just spending a little time with one verse per day, God will be more active in your life. He'll make your life, he'll change your life for the better. And that's turned into a ministry. We have over 600,000 people on our Facebook page, Jimmy Houston Outdoors Facebook. And we just have that one page there. We have got a personal page, but that page allows a lot of people on, I think 635,000 on there. And we had 56,000 people listen to that daily devotional the other day on Facebook. We had another 5 or 6 thousand on YouTube, plus on Facebook another 40 or 50,000 that actually read the devotional, because we post it as a picture post on there where they can read it if they don't want to listen to me read the devotional. So, and normally it's not 56,000, but routinely it's 15 or 20,000 that listen to that, watch that on Facebook, and another, like I said, several thousand on YouTube. And that's a pretty big ministry when you think about it. That particular day was like filling up 100,000 seat football stadium with people and listening to the Word of God for 5 minutes, and that's all it is. And there are so many people, and we get thousands of comments on there, and so many people that that God has changed their life through that. So it is a ministry in itself. Even though I'm not a preacher, I'm just a poor country fisherman, but it's telling the gospel of Jesus Christ the way it really is, and the way it is to just a born again Christian like me. I have no theological training, definitely not a preacher at all. But when we first started talking about this, Andrea, you mentioned people that showed their faith, and people that sort of did not show their faith, or maybe was even ashamed to show their faith publicly. And Jesus Christ himself said that if you're ashamed of me in front of people, I will be ashamed of you in front of my Father. But then he put the caveat on also, if you are not ashamed of me, if you'll boldly tell people about me, I'll not be ashamed of you in front of my Father. And, I would hate to think that Jesus Christ would be ashamed of me in front of God Almighty. And, I've done a lot of things in my life that Jesus Christ would probably be ashamed of me, but he's sure not going to be ashamed of me because of that. And that's really about all Jesus, when he walked the earth, told his closest disciples and friends to do, was just to go out there and tell the world about me.
Yeah.
Go tell them about me. And really, that's all I'm doing. And we're doing it in a little bit different manner. And we're doing it in a venue that God has set up for us. And whether we have, 600,000 people on Facebook, or 25,000, or 1,000,000 people, or whatever on whatever, it's what God's planned for me. And yeah, I would like to see 100,000, 200, 500,000, 600,000 on YouTube, where that would be, 100,000 people a day listening to that scripture and stuff. But whatever God has planned for me, and in those numbers, there are people that need that verse today. It's like you can pick your Bible up, Andrew, and open it up and put your finger down without looking, and then read that verse, and you'll say, wow, I can't believe how that affects what's happening to me right now, what I'm going through in my life, what my friends are going through. How, I can't believe that. Look at that. And all I did was open a Bible, put my finger down. So God has got those scriptures, which took us 2 years to write, that book with that devotional, and pick those scriptures out and those fishing tips. And God has got individuals that he will divinely place that will listen to that, or read it in that book, or read it on Facebook. Might not ever watch one of my videos of me reading it. And that's all I do is read it. I embellish it, maybe about the scripture. I might talk a little more about the fishing. I might talk a little bit more about the tip. I might tell a little bit more about the devotional. But, I add a couple minutes to them. But it might be just what some individual needs to change their life. It might be what some individual needs to keep them from committing suicide. We get hundreds and hundreds of comments every day on that daily devotional channel, and it's unbelievable how, I don't guess you should say unbelievable. It's extraordinary how many lives have been changed because of that. And I didn't change their life. The YouTube channel or Facebook didn't change their lives. God changed their life. He just used that as a tool, and he used me as a tool. And but he knew where to point it, and he knew how to reach that individual the best way. And if he had to reach them in the front of a bass boat, or if he had to reach them uh, you know, after their wife died, or after their wife had a stroke, or after they lost a son or daughter, or whatever, after they had a divorce. I mean, on and on and on and on and on, every type of problem you could have, after they got fired from a job. One of the things that a professional fisherman has the honor of doing, he knows how to get, he knows about getting fired. We've
Yeah.
all been fired. Even the great Roland Martin and the great Bill Dance has been fired because they've cried on my shoulder about it. I've cried on theirs as well. But it's been a wonderful. It's been an honor to get to do that. It's an honor to get to go speak at these churches, and we speak at some of the largest churches in the nation, and we've spoken a lot of small churches too. But it's pretty amazing. But God has chosen a lot of people, and He uses a lot of different ways to reach them, and we reach some of them through fishing.
That sets me up really nicely for the very last question I want to ask you today. And this is, I'm going to be honest, this is probably the deepest question I've ever asked on this show in my entire life. But when people think Jimmy Houston, people think angler. That's the very first thing that comes to people's mind is professional angler. But do you think that maybe the purpose of Jimmy Houston being on this earth today is to use angling as a more of a vessel, I think, to reach these large swaths of people and to spread the gospel and spread your faith more so than just what people think of you as an angler? Is this probably the more important thing in your life that you're doing?
It is, well, without a doubt, it's the most important thing in my life. It's the most important thing we did before anything like social media or fishing tournaments or anything. It is the most important thing. And we meet people. I meet more fishermen in person, face to face, than any professional fisherman out there. But the reason I say that is I do more personal appearances than anybody. I probably still, even doing 70 or 80 or 90 a year, probably still doing more than anybody in this business is doing. So I talk to more people face to face, and what I hear about more is the devotional channel and how things that we've said and done through what we've done speaking at churches and things has been important in their life. And yeah, people talk about fishing, sure, but yeah, that's far more important than anything else we've ever done. And I listen to a lot of Christian music, and there's a song out that talks about it's only Jesus, and when it's all said and done, I don't care if they remember me. It's only Jesus, and that's really the most important thing. And when you lay all your trophies down and all the dust is settled, and that's really the only thing that really matters. And fishing has been an avenue that's allowed us to reach more people than we could ever imagine. When I think about, like watching a NASCAR race on television a couple nights ago or last night, whenever it was, the NASCAR race, I guess that might have been last night, and seeing the announcers, which is a lot of retired NASCAR drivers, and telling Chris, you remember how all the stuff we've done with Tony, you remember Michael Waltrip and all the stories I told you about Michael and Larry Mack there, Larry Mack and I do a lot of things, and then you get to racing and Martin Truex wins, and I said, you remember when we met Martin, when you first met Martin, and I told you what a nice young man he was, and we met him on out there on Lake, and whatever that lake is over at Hank Parker lived on, in Lake Norman, lived on Lake Norman. He brought that back. You remember that, baby, when he did that? She said, oh, yeah, I remember. And Martin Truex come up to us and right before dark, and one day of practice at a tournament, and he got this. He said, I got to show you this bass. He pulled this bass out, and he said, is this a spot? I think it's the biggest spot I've ever caught. And I looked at it, and I said, Martin, that's not a spot. That's a largemouth bass. And he said, oh, man. He said, and so we took a couple pictures of him and I with that fish, and we turned it loose, and he drove away. And Chris said, why was he carrying that bass around in his live well? And I said, he's looking for me. He knew we were having this tournament here, and he wanted to show me that bass. And Martin Truex, the hottest, biggest name NASCAR driver is still driving right now. And I said, he's looking for me. I said, he didn't care about showing anybody else that bass. And she said, he didn't know the difference between a largemouth and a spot. I said, he knew it was a largemouth bass. He just needed a reason to show it to me.
Yeah.
And I remember one time at a race up in in Kentucky Speedway when Martin was winning that Quaker State 400 by a lot. And a couple of my buddies, Scott Canterbury and Matt Air, he said, he's cheating. His car, he's cheating. He's just so much faster than anybody else. And I remember Chris saying, Scott, Matt, that cute little guy wouldn't cheat. And I talked to Chris about that last night as we watched him win that race. And I sent Martin a note after that congratulating him, and sent Johnny Morris a note congratulating him about it. And Johnny said it was a great race except for that rap music. They were in at Rap Stars. It was pretty funny. But anyway, and then Martin sent me a note. Well, I sent him a note when he was still on the stage winning. So about an hour later, he sent me a note back. But when you think about it, some poor country fisherman from Lake Tenkiller and Cookson, Oklahoma, has fished with presidents, fished with senators and governors and movie stars and NASCAR drivers and NBA stars and NFL stars and Major League Baseball players and on and on and on, famous actors. And you think about fishing, and God took fishing and led us down that path. And it's really amazing. And then you think about, honestly, probably all of it is set and designed for 56,000 people on Facebook to listen to a 5-minute devotion that will, for some of those 56,000 people, change their life for eternity. And when you think about it in those terms, you just got to sit back and say, what a God we serve. What a God we serve.
Amen. Well, I appreciate you. I don't get sentimental a lot, but I mean, you mean so much to so many people, and you put a good bow on it right there. When you sit down and you fire up the camera and you talk to your YouTube channel and you're talking to them about, your fishing and life updates, but also Bible passages and faith, I think you're using your platform not just to make people better anglers, but to make a lot of people better people. And I think we probably owe you a big thank you for that. So that wraps us up really nicely here. Thank you so much for stopping by. Everybody, if you're listening, go check out, Jimmy Houston Outdoors. It's Jimmy Houston Outdoors Fishing on YouTube. The website, jimmyhouston.com. You can go buy books, baits, apparel. You got pecans, you got coffee, you got all kinds of stuff that people can go buy. But ladies and gentlemen, that is our conversation with the one and only Mr. Jimmy Houston. Jimmy, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. We're on ESPN2 every Saturday morning. Discovery Channel Sunday morning, ESPN on Saturday morning. See y'all out there on the water. God bless you.